Congress is. Put it up for me, Mayor. Put it up.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. That's what I'm talking about. That is, now that's nice looking stuff there, man. That's what I'm talking about.
You're in the Florentine Films production crew.
And our book and DVD, and Gloryland is written by Shelton Johnson, who you'll get to see.
Sheldon, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. This looks beautiful. Ken, you're going to kick things off?
We are running a very tight ship tonight, and the most important thing is to watch this film and to share these very cherished moments here with President Barack Obama. Very quickly, Ken Burns is going to make a few comments. Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan, who spent 10 years of their life producing this film, really have done a tremendous job and a major contribution to the nation and really to the world. Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan, the Civil War, jazz, baseball, Civil War, what they have done is they really have done the very best job in the history of America in terms of telling America's story. And tonight, as they present the National Park screening here at the White House as part of telling that America's story. So without further ado, here is Ken Burns.
Yay.
We are so honored to be able to share with you a glimpse of our film. You know, the late historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. said that we suffer today from too much pluribus and not enough unum. And I think that in some ways all the films that we have made have tried to speak to unum, as you have done in your campaign and now in your presidency. And we have struggled to make the same film over and over again, each film asking a deceptively simple question. Who are we? Who are these strange and complicated people who like to call themselves Americans? And we have found in the course of American history that often it engages the question of race, central to our story in both good and bad ways, but also space, the physical geography of our country. And we think that our interest in that physical geography has reached its apotheosis in this project. For the first time in human history, land was set aside not for kings or royalty or the rich, but for everyone and for all time. We invented this national park idea. And the idea, like the developing idea of liberty, of Thomas Jefferson's limited all men are created equal, has evolved and changed over the years and embraced our complicated history, saving not just beautiful scenery, but also our social, political, and military history. We're filmmakers. We hate to show clips. We have a 12-hour film, and I've asked the Secret Service to lock the doors, and you'll be out by 6 tomorrow morning if we don't take any bathroom breaks. We have selected 56 minutes of clips that range across the things. Suffice to say, this is a bottom-up story. It isn't just a top-down story. The heart of American history is, of course, a bottom-up story of people from every race, of every creed, of every ethnicity, from every conceivable background, and our film celebrates them. But for this evening, for the purposes of being here with you, we thought we would select for you a handful of clips that represent what we think is real leadership, that those presidents that have exerted their leadership and supported, sometimes at great risk, the national parks are presidents who have been remembered. Their standout leadership has survived the test of time because, of course, we are talking, as you know, by standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon, infinite of time. We feel our own relative atomic insignificance, one person said in our series, as we stand on the rim of the Grand Canyon and contemplate the eons of time that created that magnificent canyon. And we are so blessed to have this amazing park service that is charged with saving these protected lands. And we thought we would give you examples of some presidents, a shy and retiring fellow named Theodore Roosevelt, his distant cousin in the worst economic period of our time, and where the parks ironically thrived as never before, and then jump to the administrations of President Kennedy and Johnson and some of the people who worked at the Interior Department. Of course, hand in hand with this great presidential leadership has been an extraordinary succession of amazing secretaries of the Interior. So after the overture of our film, the first 12 minutes, we'll get on to some scenes, and then we'd like to share with you a moment with a ranger we discovered in the Sierras who was interpreting the little-known story of the Buffalo Soldiers, who were the park's first protectors at Yosemite, one of the most beautiful places on earth. We're, again, so grateful that you would take some time out of your busy schedule to give us a few moments, and I speak entirely on behalf of the author and co-producer of this film and my best friend, Dayton Duncan, as I speak now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Two very quick things as I introduce President Barack Obama. I have had an amazing life, and in large part because of the journey that I have shared with President Barack Obama. There was a time when he and I were together in Yellowstone just in the last few months with Michelle and the girls. And as we walked through Yellowstone and as he saw Old Faithful and some of the geysers, I was thinking about how truly he is a personification of the best that there is in America, because here was this person who, at the age of 11, was there with his grandmother and with his mother and with his sister, and now returning back to this place. Most people would have said he could never have done it, and yet he was returning back to this place now as President of the United States. For me, that was one of my proudest moments of my entire life. And secondly, for me, being chosen by him to be his Secretary of the Interior is also the proudest moment of my life, because I am committed to making sure that his agenda and his legacy is one that at the end of the day, when they write the contributions of Barack Obama and his legacy to the United States of America, that he will have a legacy on the landscapes of America that will surpass that legacy of T.R. Roosevelt. So with that, here is the President of the United States of America.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, guys. No need to stand up again. Come on. Eat your popcorn. Well, look, first of all, I think it's fair to say that my selection of Ken Salazar has given a lot of people a lot of hope, because not only is he an expert on land use and water and all the issues that pertain to the Department of Interior, but also he has a passion that I think comes from knowing the land. There's something about the West and knowing a piece of land and having generations before you and memories that are woven into the story of your family that makes you extraordinarily qualified for this position. And so I am just really thrilled about the job that Ken Salazar is doing, and his lovely wife Hope putting up with him traveling so much. I'm grateful to them. To Ken and Dayton, I have been such fans of your work for so many years. I still look at Ken, at least, I'm sorry, Dayton, but he looks like he's only 20. So I'm still trying to figure out how he's been able to produce this. Yeah, figuring out how you guys have been able to produce just this extraordinary body of work. And Ken articulated better than I ever could what their intent has been, and how taking these what appear to be segments of American life, they've been able to tell a much broader story about who we are as a people, and our heart and our soul. So I'm extraordinarily grateful to them. I want to thank Jarvis Johnson, our National Park Service Director, and all the members of the National Park Service who do such an extraordinary job on our behalf. And then let me just close by saying that Ken mentioned this trip I took when I was a kid. I grew up in Hawaii, and that whole state is sort of a national park. It's just a gorgeous place. But it is pretty far out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And so I always had this extraordinary imagination about what the continental United States must be like. but I hadn't experienced it myself. And so at the age of 11, it was decided that me, my 2-year-old sister at the time, my grandmother, and my mother would take a trip throughout the continental United States. And we started in Seattle and we worked our way down, and we went to, of course, Disneyland, which was very important. And then we started going west and hit the Grand Canyon and this beautiful smaller park called Canyon de Chelly, with canyons running through it and Indian ruins built into the face of the cliffs there. And then went to Kansas City and up to Chicago, and then came back through Yellowstone. And when I think about that trip, it's exactly as Ken described. There was the grandeur of the space, realizing what an incredible bounty had been given to America. The sight of the Grand Canyon, the sight of bison running through a stretch of plain in Yellowstone, it gave you a sense that this was something special, this country that we have. And it's seared into my memory in a way that very few things have. And so the opportunity to be able to take Malia and Sasha on those trips, although we were traveling on Greyhound buses and staying in Howard Johnson's, and Malia and Sasha went on Air Force One, Marine One, so their experience was a little different than mine had been, but I think they were no less affected, and that's part of what is hopefully best about our government. The notion that collectively we come together and we say, we're going to preserve some things that last beyond our individual lives, that we're going to pass that on, and that we have to do it together. We can't do it on our own because each of us are motivated by our own self-interests and our own immediate needs, and so every once in a while we need the ability to step back from our personal wants and project something finer and better for future generations. That's what the Park District's all about. That's our national parks are all about. That's what Ken's charged with continuing in his task, and I think all of us have an obligation to continue it as well. So I'm thrilled that you guys are here. I'm going to stop talking. Enjoy the show. All right.
If anyone has to use the restroom during the movie, please use the exit in the back. There are stairs to walk the steps, and there's also still popcorn and water and soda if you need anything as well.
All right.
I think it is time for a 21st century conservation legacy, and Barack Obama, in my view, will be that president that will deliver on that agenda with the help of all of you who are in this room. But certainly we get a huge head start and momentum because of the great work that Ken Burns and Dayton Benson have done. So let me turn it back to them and give them a round of applause for your really
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We have been inspired over the last several months since you took your position as Secretary of the Interior with your concept of the treasured landscapes, and also your initiative to educate the young people about the glories that we have. I feel compelled also to acknowledge not just Shelton Johnson, who's in this room, but Bob Stanton, a former Park Service director, and Carl Pope from the Sierra Club, who played an enormous role in our film, and also everyone within the Park Service who helped us and opened doors and permitted us extraordinary access. I'd like to turn, in some ways, your question a little bit on its end and imagine what kind of country we might be without the national parks. You all remember and know the movie It's a Wonderful Life, where we're faced with seeing a vision of America that's Pottersville or Bedford Falls. If we had no national parks, the Grand Canyon would be lined with mansions for the rich and none of us would have access. If there were no national parks, the Everglades would be drained and it would just be golf courses and tract housing and development after development. If there were no national parks, two exquisite valleys that we know, Yosemite and Zion, would be gated communities. If there were no national parks, as Dayton is fond of saying, Yellowstone would be Geyser World. And this is the kind of vision that we have, and the challenges that the Secretary spoke about are very real. Not only do we have a backlog of maintenance of between $8 and $9 billion to retire stuff we know we can do tomorrow, but we have to initiate a vision for the future that isn't just that restoration, but the ability to add new lands to these treasures. And we think that's, in some small way, that the film can help communicate, as Dayton said so wonderfully in the film, this sense of ownership that we all share of the national parks, and communicate those to communities that do not yet feel a sense of that ownership. And thanks to Shelton and others, we've been able to go over these last 6 months to communities, mostly inner city communities, often African American or Hispanic American, folks that do not yet feel that ownership, and are able to show them, this clip reel notwithstanding, heroes of the national park story, legitimate heroes of the national park story that look and sound like them. And Shelton and Dayton and I can tell you wonderful stories of being out on the road and realizing how ripe they are now to understand the glories, that we make better citizens, as Clay Jenkinson suggests. You cannot be a real American unless you have an authentic relationship to nature. Dayton.
Well, this has been a project of 10 years for both of us, very deep to both of our hearts, and it comes out in 2 weeks, and to a certain extent, 10 days, right? My, how time flies. So to a certain extent, our job's done. Now it's up to you guys, to a certain extent. I do want to say this, is that what we hope that our film will accomplish is several things. That millions of Americans will be brought into acquaintance with these treasures that are theirs, whether they've been to one or not. If they've already been to a park, they'll be reminded of it, and they'll be reminded of that it was never easy, that the parks don't just exist automatically. One thing that our film to a diverse American population, which has a larger and larger percentages of whom don't have what I had as a kid, which was to be taken to the park as an anchor. And therefore that started me on the process that culminates in this film.
You have a lot of work to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Spirit and continuity to our government and to our national life. Very good to be here at these Virginia CCC camps. I wish I could see them all over the country. And I hope that all over the country they're in as fine condition as the camps that I've seen today. I wish that I could take a couple of months off from the White House and come down here and live with them, because I know I'd get full of health the way they have. The only difference is that they've put on an average of about 12 pounds apiece since they got here, and I'm trying to take off 12 pounds. The bank holiday, while resulting in many cases in great inconvenience, is affording us the opportunity to supply
President Roosevelt wants $300 million more to continue the good work. Sound investment in a...
Men from the big city are finding work and happiness in this government conservation camp at Yellowstone. Plenty to do clearing trails of underbrush to prevent forest fires and gathering up driftwood around the great
Pet projects. They're a great thing for city boys. The beautiful background makes work a real pleasure for lads used to the drab outlines of the tenements. A far cry from the roar of the subway to that of Old Faithful, most famous geyser in the world.
In magnificent natural beauty of the American national parks have gone many companies of the Civilian Conservation Corps to further projects which will guard this wealth of beauty against destruction by man and nature. It is not made work. Since it came into existence in 1916, the National Park Service
Your passport to yesterday is a ticket on one of the North American continent's most fascinating railroads. Passengers arrive by boat at Skagway, the Alaskan terminus of the railway that runs over the famed Gold Trail of '98 to Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory. The nostalgia aroused by Skagway is but a curtain raiser to what lies at the end of the rail journey. The old-timer at the station gives the passengers a send-off on their 110-mile trip. The first 20 miles carries the train 3,000 feet into White Pass, where so many fell and died trying to conquer the mountains and cross over into the gold country. The adventuresome follow the actual shortcut through Miles Canyon, where prospectors brave the rapids to save precious miles. Today it's a trip of breathtaking beauty that terminates at Whitehorse. Yesterday, it was a white hell to the men who braved the pass to found the boomtown. It was built on the rich gold deposits. Today, Whitehorse is a museum town that relives its past glories. The gold itself is gone, but those memories are golden. Excursion to yesterday, to a gold mine of history. In these days of supersonic airplanes, the Dutch haven't forgotten the heritage of the balloon. At The Hague, they're commemorating the golden anniversary of the first balloon race in the Netherlands with a modern-day reenactment. 5 balloons start, the same number that took off in that first race in 1912. The balloonists are using some modern safety equipment, but otherwise they conduct the race under the rules that govern that first flight. When they soar over towns and villages, they draw more attention than a modern plane. After all, the balloonists were the forefathers of today's astronauts. Today they are using the old rope trick for ballast. When the craft soars too high, the weight of the rope pulls it down. When it dips too low, the lost weight of the rope on the ground causes it to bob aloft. The balloon had a long and honorable career in aviation history, and it's here to stay. Can you imagine the zoo on a Sunday afternoon without balloons? The recent French elections proved to be a landslide to one shady character. Slipping through the streets mysteriously, our hero stripped fences and walls of election and theatrical posters. He has no shade of political opinion. He was only interested in shades of color. All right, now he has his loot. What's his pitch? Well, if nature imitates art, our boy is imitating something or other with paste pot and shears. He takes his scraps and waste and dreams them into masterpieces he hopes will take Paris by storm. Our hero is sure of one thing: he'll never run out of political posters. Italian designers are aiming at the top with their new fur fashions. At Rome's Excelsior Hotel, they parade grand design coats, but they're putting greater emphasis on the bonnets that should go with them. The crowd is treated to a highly stylized version of that ooh and ah fur chinchilla. Even when you can't afford it, this is a treat for the eyes. The designers have no intention of losing sight of the eternal feminine when they wrap milady in fur. Here they use it discreetly, they say, to emphasize the figure. In other words, pretty. "25 years ago, the United States was unwittingly contributing armaments to Japan. Nippon suddenly loomed on the market as the largest purchaser of scrap metal. A few years later, it came back in the form of shells. There was a recession that reminded people of the crash of 1929 as the stock market fell off drastically. 7 million share days were common under a selling wave, and many stocks that had a slow climb from the big crash lost all of their gains and more. While the economists were calling it a recession, many people were fearful of another full-scale depression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, swinging through the West on a campaign tour, took time out for a visit to Yellowstone National Park. An exponent of conservation, Mr. Roosevelt backed many measures aimed at enlarging our national forests and preserving wildlife. This was a moment of relaxation amid the scenes he loved. The recently married Duke and Duchess of Windsor was still followed by crowds wherever they traveled. In Paris, Britain's former king and his bride made the announcement that they were not intending to embarrass the royal family by settling in England. Since then, they have been world travelers. Vittorio Mussolini, son of the Italian dictator, was visiting in the United States on a tour designed to win friends for his father's regime. His tour was cut short when he found his reception far from cordial. Maybe young Mussolini could have used this machine when he got home. Ever say you could have kicked yourself for doing something or other? Well, Tom Haywood of North Carolina came up with this do-it-yourself booter that could dish out all that you could take. And it was fun to boot.
Well.
Yes, everyone. Set to vibrate,
cool
please.
with the limos on film, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey Nate,
Yeah.
can you just
what we do here?
make sure the
limousines.
Is that her going out?
She's going to be going to
Yeah,
there's a farmer's
just make sure
market.
they don't go
just
if
opening
the
up this
wind
up this
picks
week.
up or
Just going
anything.
to check it out.
Yeah.
What do you do? You this team? What's your...
Oh, I'm the presidential videographer.
Ah,
on the official
how
website.
nice.
So usually just trail around with a little EX3.
How nice.
After the president moon, whatever he does.
That's great.
But then sometimes we blow it up into a bigger
Yeah.
project. So we thought the president going to Yellowstone. So
Terrific.
Great opportunity.
Good.
Yeah.
Are you shooting tonight, or is this just...
We're going to shoot your remarks.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Terrific.
So, so they better be good.
Oh, well, it's all
And on
extemporaneous.
message.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah,
You
message.
throw in something about healthcare, public options.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna hide your lav.
Oh, yeah.
wire.
Got
You're
it.
gonna button. Never mind.
Would you like me to button?
If it might
If
work.
you don't want a button, you don't have to button.
Great.
Sir.
I don't think you should button.
Great.
We're having a chat on the cell phone.
Exactly.
All
That's
right.
fine.
Well,
How's the
you
outline look?
can't
Okay.
see
The eye line is good.
That's me. Okay, and this is not going to take forever.
Sure.
So, basically, you've been for years now working on this project, so I'm sure you've, amassed quite a number of thoughts about national parks and how they play in with American life. But can you tell us some of the more surprising things that that you discovered, or summary, things that you've sort of synthesized together?
Another way of thinking about it is to wonder what it would be like, what kind of country we would be like without the national parks. If you've seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life, the hero has a chance to live between Pottersville and Bedford Falls. And I think all of us Americans want to live in Bedford Falls. If there were no national parks, the Grand Canyon would be lined with mansions of the rich and none of us would have access. If there were no national parks, the Everglades would have been drained long ago and there'd be track housing and developments and golf courses. If there was no national parks, Yosemite and Zion National Parks, these beautiful canyons, would be gated communities. If there were no national parks, Yellowstone would be Geyser World.
That's true. And you know, from watching the movie, we see like sort of how the creation of national parks was, you know, a combination of a lot of people's hard work, some of whom are obviously very humble and some of whom are very powerful.
When you talk about the national parks, people normally say, oh, Teddy Roosevelt. And what they forget is that the real story is a bottom-up story of people from every conceivable background who fell in love with the place and went against the momentum of the time that wanted to develop them and said, no, we need to save these places, these special places. And by saving them, we saved animals. The bison, you know, one of the magnificent symbols of our country, would be extinct had not Yellowstone National Park been around. It would just be a stuffed animal in a museum like the woolly mammoth that we wouldn't have any relationship to. But we have bison, and we can enjoy them forever.
Let's wait for this fire truck to go by. Yeah, it'd be a terrible national park symbol if we lost the bison.
Exactly.
Just give it 1 second.
Oh, no. I fully understand.
It's DC.
Even with, and then at least you don't have the national stuff. But having said that, then no.
Yeah.
It's a red-tailed hawk just.
There was
flying
just
around
a
earlier.
yeah, a hawk flying.
Did you see that hawk just
Yeah,
now?
he was flying this way earlier.
It's a red tail, huh?
It's cool.
Yeah.
How many of the parks were you able to visit during the making of this project?
I didn't do a count, but Dayton Duncan, who's the writer and co-producer, has been to all 58 of the natural national parks, and we've all been to dozens and dozens of the other units that make up the 391 units of the National Park Service.
And were you able to visit Yellowstone?
We've been to Yellowstone in every season, at every time of day and night. We've looked at it from every vantage. We've been there when it's been 20 degrees below zero and felt we had been thrust back, as the ranger Shelton Johnson said, back into the Pleistocene. We've been there on hot, steamy days. We've watched not only Old Faithful go off, but stamped our feet and tried to get circulation back into our toes, waiting for Riverside Geyser to go off, which didn't go off on schedule, and we waited several hours, but when it did, it was worthwhile.
Yeah, Old Faithful gets all the credit, but it's actually one of your sort of lesser geysers.
Well, it's spectacular in that it goes so high and it's regular, so you can time your seeing of it. The other geysers, some of them do go higher, but are on sometimes a decade-long cycle, if it's a cycle at all. But there are hundreds and hundreds of geysers there, and anyone who just confines themselves to just Old Faithful is like going and doing one ride at Disneyland.
You know, there are a lot of the recovery efforts they're doing in Yellowstone are to, you know, take some of the roads out of the main causeways, and so it's ironic, I guess, how you have to use so many more resources and money to make things less developed. But this seems to be the way that Yellowstone is.
The history of the national parks has been the history of continual adaptation as we've understood how we've wanted to relate to our national parks. In the beginning, anything went. We were happy to have everybody come, and people would park in the meadows and sort of do all sorts of trespass. But we've learned as the decades have gone on about how to adapt and how, more importantly, to readapt to what we want out of our national parks. Interestingly enough, the parks thrived during the Great Depression. They got the first shovel-ready stimulus dollars of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal in the form of the Civilian Conservation Corps that sent, you know, thousands and millions of young men to work in the national parks, creating trails and rest areas that we enjoy today. And so too now, the national parks have received some of the earliest stimulus money, over $750 million, directed coincidentally to 750 different projects throughout the system, which will help to retire just a fraction of the backlog of maintenance, over $8 billion that we all know the parks need. You know, these are parks, this is not a partisan issue. The parks are loved by Republicans and independents and Democrats alike. They're woven into the fabric of our family experience as Americans, and everyone wants to see them improved. And we've got an upcoming centennial of the National Park Service coming up in 2016, and there is a bipartisan public-private foundation, corporate, governmental effort to try to bring the parks up to snuff. And we hope that the film adds some small way to the public's awareness of what an extraordinary birthright we have in the national parks, and how perhaps through neglect of recent years, these crown jewels deserve to be polished.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about presidents in the park. How many presidents, you know, all the way from I know
Abraham Lincoln.
All I know is Yellowstone, specifically, 10 presidents went there. But
you know,
yeah, you know.
The national parks, to me, I think, are studies in leadership. How presidents have related to the national parks have been in some ways defining aspects of their larger leadership quality. First of all, the first reservation ever set aside, Yosemite, was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln in the midst of the Civil War when 2,000 casualties a day were coming back up to Washington, D.C. And yet he had the foresight to understand where the direction of the country was heading and to set aside, for the first time in human history, this pristine land. It was given to the state of California for care for a while, so it's not technically the first national park. That came in 1872 when U.S. Grant signed into law setting aside Yellowstone Park, but it was in Wyoming territory. There wasn't an entity to give it to it, and so accidentally it became the world's first national park. The leadership we really focus on with regard to the national parks, though, is that of Teddy Roosevelt's. In the beginning, we fell in love with these places almost for spiritual reasons. As Americans liberated from the tyranny not just of political oppression, but religious oppression, we could find God in these cathedrals in nature better than following a dogmatic devotion in cathedrals built by man. And so the first impulse was to save these places where you could touch God. But Teddy Roosevelt introduced and promoted the idea of conservation, that we Americans need to share these things in common, that there was a democratic spirit to the national parks that were essential to their character. And he showed extraordinary leadership, not just in understanding that, but in pushing through parks, sometimes against local and congressional opposition, understanding that sometimes you have to stand up for what's good for the whole, and that the individual local interests don't always know what's right for a particular place. If Yellowstone National Park had just been a state park, the geysers would still be going off, but we Americans wouldn't feel that sense of ownership. It wouldn't be an emblem, a badge of the spectacularness of the whole United States. And Roosevelt understood that and helped put the Grand Canyon into play and created a lot of wildlife refuges and other national monuments like Devil's Tower. His presidency was extraordinary and almost equaled by his distant cousin Franklin Roosevelt, who in the midst of the Depression committed the first dollars to actually acquire land at the Smoky Mountains and evolved what a very national park could be, adding historical sites like the battlefields of the Civil War, symbols of our very existence like the Statue of Liberty and Mount Rushmore, and even set in motion a system that would begin to embrace places of shame, part of our complicated history that no other country on earth is willing to tell, but we Americans are, on the notion that a great country can be even greater by acknowledging them.
What do you think it means to both, I guess, the people and the parks when a president visits somewhere?
Well, I think it's so symbolic. You know, if you read the president's extraordinary memoir, his mother and grandmother worried that having grown up in Hawaii, he might not have that sense of what the country was really about. So how did they inculcate him in the country? They flew to the mainland and took him to Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. This is the way you become an American. And so I think for the president to come back, to take his children there, to recapitulate his personal memory, but also to say to the country, we share these things in common, has a huge, powerful effect. All of us begin to sit up straight and say, right, national parks, I can go them, I'm a co-owner, this is part of my heritage.
It was funny also looking at things that you learn when you're researching this stuff. I didn't know that Gerald Ford was actually a park ranger.
Yes.
Yeah. Then when he made that speech in front of Old Faithful, and his son as well, I believe.
Exactly.
Yeah. So a lot of the presidents have very sort of close
Yeah,
memories.
and our recent history has Jimmy Carter really helping to shepherd through the incredibly contentious Alaska Acts that more than doubled the acreage of the parks by creating those magnificent parks in Alaska and adding on to the existing one in Alaska at Denali. And so some of the most spectacular wilderness areas in the world are to be found in the national parks in Alaska, and we can credit, you know, many people, including President Carter, for that.
And do you think it has an impact on the number of people who go when people see presidents going to the parks? Or?
I think it does. During the Depression, at our lowest point as a country, economically and in some ways spiritually, we really were questioning everything. Roosevelt made a series of highly publicized visits to the national parks, not just to visit the local CCC camps, which he did to great effect, but also touring the great western parks like Glacier and Yellowstone and Yosemite. And that going there was a way of reminding Americans that they share this land in common. When we sing "My Country 'Tis of Thee," we're not talking about cities, we're not talking about trade, statistics, and output. We're talking about the land, and this is the land that we saved. And the Roosevelt was saying, look what we have. Look at this rich patrimony that's represented by the national parks. Come out. I wish I could come out, he would say, to these parks more often. And Americans took him at his word and flooded into the national parks, and they had a renaissance that belies the severity of the Great Depression.
Yeah, that's very true. I think they're saying now, you know, with the recession, a lot of national park attendance is up, but it's local folks coming.
Well, you know, we're at an existential moment now. It isn't just because of the economic difficulties that we experience, but we now live in a virtual world, particularly our children. We spend way too much time focused on what is not reality. And the parks offer the antidote to that. They give a great breathing space for a democracy, and they permit us to reinvigorate our connections to the lands. And, you know, the attendance at the national parks was skyrocketing, and in recent years, as that virtual world has taken over, it's sort of evened out a little bit. And what we hope is that the focus of the president on this, some of the new initiatives coming out of the Interior Department and Secretary Salazar, permit us to reinvigorate our own passionate interest in the national parks, to remind us that we are all co-owners of the most spectacular scenery on earth, and our obligation as co-owners is to just go visit this property now and then, make sure it's being taken care of, and put it in our will for our posterity.
So what are you doing here today at the White House?
Well, we have the great privilege of being able to share with the president an hour's worth of footage from our 6-part, 12-hour series on the history of the national parks. It's not a travelogue, it's not a nature film, but rather engaging the ideas and the history of this extraordinary American invention, that land could be set aside for democratic purposes, not for the very rich. And this clips that will show the president will detail the glories of the parks, but also show in specific examples extraordinary leadership from his predecessors, like Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt, but also Interior Secretaries and Park Service directors who helped move this along. Like the United States of America, born under the notion that all men are created equal, when Jefferson wrote that, he meant all white men of property free of debt. Well, we don't mean that anymore. All of American history is the continual enlarging of that rather narrow definition of Thomas Jefferson's. So too, the parks began setting out saving obvious natural scenery, spectacular scenery, waterfalls and geysers and Grand Canyons. But it's evolved. We've saved archaeological sites. We've saved complex habitats like the Everglades. We've added places that represent our historical and cultural and military past. And we've also been big enough to include those things that represent the kind of undertow of American history. And so we look forward to sharing with the president and perhaps inspiring him to take the park and the park idea to its next place, to its next generation, to its next iteration.
What do you see that as being?
I think right now our main task is restoration. We have this huge $8 to $9 billion backlog, but there are many monuments that could be elevated to national park status. There are many national forests that are part of the Agriculture Department that ring some of our national parks that could be sent over to Interior and added to enlarge national parks to make them represent more the migratory patterns of some of the larger animals that would do so much good into preserving those species. We need always to be aware of our complicated past and to honor those places or homesteads or events that are part of that past. And I think it's the job of any president not just to tread water, to do what you can to keep things up to snuff, but to realize that, like the United States, it's a perpetual motion machine. And it is the energy of leadership that keeps that machine going.
Was it hard cutting it down to the time? That must have been painful.
Our cutting room floor is filled, despite the length of this film, our cutting room floor is filled not with bad scenes but with good scenes. You know, if you remember the movie Amadeus, they always say too many notes. So there's so much spectacularly beautiful footage that's not there. There's so many interesting stories and individuals that we're so excited to share, and fortunately our companion book permits us to do that. Fortunately some of the DVD extras permit us to do that, and fortunately in our evangelical tour of the country trying to wake people up to the glories of the national park, we get to slip them in as well. But it's always a painful process in the editing room when you realize that even something that's good has to go.
Let's go to the wipe shot. And what did you discover in your journalism with stuff about the White House as a national park? Do you know when it became one?
I don't know. You know, as we began to enlarge our idea of the national parks, it stopped being just spectacular scenery. We began to understand fact that the places that represent our history are part of this national park system too. And what could be more important than the White House, where it is the temporary, borrowed quarters for the leader of our republic. For the first time in human history, we have had an unbroken succession of leaders who have left not through coups or through overthrow, but voluntarily, and not a single troop has changed hands. And the symbol of that is this beautiful house here, which is in itself a repository of so much history that it is necessarily one of the most important sites of the National Park Service.
Great. It seems like the rain is starting to come upon us.
Yeah.
Better take you inside.
Great.
Anyway, that's why we have a lot to do to rebuild.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Just talk to us about the state of our national parks, in 2009.
The state of our national parks in 2009 is, we have a lot of work to do, but we have a great vision for the future. President Obama understands and recognizes the importance of our national parks. We know that our national parks bring in over 300 million visitors a year. They are America's best idea, and we have to take care of what we have in 2009. But as we look to the centennial at 2016 for our national parks, we hope to establish a conservation agenda that again highlights our national parks. We're well on our way there. We have a lot more to do.
Throughout history, I guess there's been the sort of times of crisis have been great opportunities for conservation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln set aside Yosemite, and the Civil War is still the bloodiest war of America. And yet Abraham Lincoln had the vision and foresight to establish Yosemite. And then during the great days of the Industrial Revolution, when our rivers were being dried up and polluted, it was T.R. Roosevelt who became the greatest conservation president of the last century, and that was a time of crisis. And then Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression and what he did with the Civilian Conservation Corps and the expansion of the national park system. And so now we are in another time of crisis. President Obama has 2 wars on his hands and an international conflict, which is very difficult in almost every corner of the world, the economic situation which he inherited when he came into office. And so it's in that crisis that there also is opportunity. And national parks create the opportunity of unifying the American spirit. And so we have been very pleased that President Obama and his family decided that as part of their summer they would actually visit the national parks and to put a spotlight on the national parks, because it is a unifying American idea, fundamentally democratic, and very much a part of our future.
What do you think it means to a national park when a president comes and visits?
When the president visits a national park, it is one of the most astounding experiences within our national parks family. All the focus is about the president of our United States of America visiting one of our national icons. We have about almost 400 of them around the country. And when the president visits one of them, all eyes are turned to that place. So it is a time of great celebration because the president is helping us put the spotlight on this great American idea.
And how was it for you? You tagged along and got to check out Yellowstone. Was your first time seeing Yellowstone since being secretary?
It's actually my first time ever at Yellowstone, and so not bad at all to go to Yellowstone for the very first time and to be able to go with President Obama and his family. It was a historic moment for me personally because as I walked through Yellowstone with President Obama and his family, I thought so many times and talked to him about what it was like for him as an 11-year-old boy to be there with his grandmother and his mother and at the time his 2-year-old sister. And I think it was through that journey that he was discovering what America, great outdoors, was all about as an 11-year-old boy. And I'm sure that when he walked through Yellowstone as an 11-year-old boy, he never understood that someday he would become president of the United States of America. And so in that reflection of Yellowstone, I also see the American dream as Barack Obama has made it a reality as he became president of the United States of America. So for me, it was a historic journey. It'll be one of those times that I will remember for all of my life that I was there with President Obama. I think for the president as well, it was very personal for him. And I think as we walked around and he was telling his girls and he was telling the First Lady about when he first saw this place, and he was telling us the stories of the bison and approaching a bison out in the park and other stories that he told us. He was thinking about a time in his life, now over 30 years ago, when he was at that same place. So it was a grand moment for me to be there with the president at Yellowstone.
Okay, let's just go into some recovery project things. One thing that seems very interesting is both in the 1930s and then now, some of the projects that were the most shovel-ready, is the term I guess everyone always uses, were the national parks. Do you have an explanation for why the parks are so much ahead of the curve when it comes to being ready for this influx of money? Is it something that everyone's always planning? Like how does the parks, how do they stay so current in terms of the projects they have seemingly just ready to roll out?
We have a list of the projects that we need to invest in our national parks, and it's a long list. It's about $9 billion of a maintenance shortfall that we have in our national parks, and that list exists. Under this president's leadership, we were able to move forward to invest in our parks in a way that hadn't been done for a very long time. We have $1 billion from the recovery funds that are actually going to build roads at places like going to the Sun Road at Glacier National Park, facilities at Yellowstone, at Yosemite, at places like the Everglades, a whole host of other places where we are going to make some major improvements, in large part because of the president's leadership in this effort. So we have huge projects and huge plans, but we interface with so many people here in America and are so much a part of the economic engine of this country. When you consider 300 million visitors, when you consider the millions of jobs that are created through tourism and visitation to our national parks, that's why it is so important. The state of Montana alone, this one rural but very large state in our union, Montana has a population of a little less than 1 million people, and yet Montana has about 11 million visitors that go there every year. They go there to hunt, to fish, to visit the national parks, and so the Great Outdoors agenda is a huge economic generator for the state of Montana, and that same story can be told 50 times over for each one of our states.
When you're thinking about your agenda as Secretary of the Interior, do you look back on previous presidents' relationships with the national park or previous Secretaries of the Interior? Do you sort of study the things that they did, or do those lessons not necessarily hold with modern times?
The president's leadership ultimately will impact everything that happens within the Department of Interior, and it was true during T.R. Roosevelt's day, and Franklin Roosevelt, and John Kennedy, and Stuart Udall. And so yes, we look back at history, and I think we are very fortunate because at this point in time in history in this administration, we have a president who understands Interior, a president who understands national parks, who was a young boy, visited them, and who visited them now as president, and someone who is a great friend of the outdoors of this country. You know, the Department of the Interior manages 20% of the landmass of the U.S., all of the outer continental shelf, and we have huge responsibilities from sea to shining sea, into the seas, into all of the islands where we have possessions in Micronesia and the Marshall Islands and Guam. And that interior agenda has been something which is very much on the president's mind, and that ultimately means that we're poised to have another great era in the history of the Department of Interior under the Obama administration.
I know that the president was very keen to go also because he really wanted to take the girls, you know, and I think a lot of parents are concerned that their kids are spending too much time on computers and video games and not enough time outside. What are like the Youth Conservation Corps and stuff? I know you guys have projects that are sort of trying to get youth involved in the national parks. How is that going?
Young people need now more than ever to be connected to the outdoors. Today, young people on average are spending about 6 hours in front of television or computers or their iPods, and spending on average about 4 minutes a day playing outdoors. And so there's a connection to having kids connected to the outdoors and their own health, because if they're out in the outdoors playing, running, hiking, doing whatever we all do in the outdoors, it's going to mean good things for their health long term. And so as we are dealing with the healthcare crisis which the country faces and which the president is so committed to resolving, and which we will resolve, it's important to also recognize that there's a connection between the great outdoors and physical activity in our young people. So we have an agenda within the Department of Interior and within President Obama's overall agenda to try to connect young people to the outdoors. This summer, we had over 10,000 young people that were working in the various agencies of the Department of Interior. We hope to be able to expand that significantly, and it's not just the Interior Department, because other departments of federal government, as part of our whole effort on United We Serve and the Engagedness Office of the White House, are reaching out to create new opportunities for young people.
And is the Youth Conservation Corps a direct descendant of the CCC, or how did the idea for that come about?
The Youth Conservation Corps is a robust effort within the Department of Interior and other agencies where we have young people who work with us doing a whole host of things. And yes, it is one of the legacy projects from the Civilian Conservation Corps. We're trying to do more of that now, and under the President's leadership and his budget, we have been able to hire and bring in new people. And with partnerships that we have with the Student Conservation Association and a whole host of other organizations, we hope to be able to reach hundreds of thousands of young people and expose them to the great wonders of the outdoors.
You yourself, what was your first experience with the national parks? Was it in Colorado? What was the first national park you visited?
You know, for me, the national parks were not something that I was exposed to very much at all as a young man. We were too poor and too far away from places where our national parks. Rocky Mountain National Park is in Colorado, but I didn't visit it until I was probably 30 or 40 years old. And so my exposure to the outdoors really comes from being a farmer and being a rancher, where I spent most of my life for the first 30 years out in the fields, out on the rivers of our place, and in what is the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado. It's a wonderful and beautiful place. And that's where I fell in love with the outdoors, and I understood the connection of our soils, our land, and our water, and our landscapes to our livelihood. For us as ranchers and farmers, we recognize that unless we kept our soils and our water healthy, we would not be able to survive economically into the future, because we depended on the land and the water to be able to make a living day after day. And so my love for the outdoors comes from my native San Luis Valley. My love for parks and rivers and restoration of rivers and great places really is something that has come later on in life. But as part of that life, I now understand the great wonders of the Apostle Islands in Wisconsin, and the great wildlife refuges of the Everglades and North Dakota and Minnesota, and Glacier National Park in Montana, and Yosemite, and the wonderful places that we have. And perhaps it's because of my own history that I believe that we need to do a lot more to connect up young people to those great outdoors, including those young people that otherwise would not have a chance to experience the outdoors. In the city of Los Angeles, for example, we have 700,000 kids in that school system, and very few of them, frankly, have ever been to Yosemite. Very few of them have ever been even to a beach. And so we need to do a lot more as a American society to get people into the outdoors.
What can we do to make the people's parks more accessible to all of the people? I mean, is it a question of getting more money, or?
I think getting more people out into our parks and into the outdoors is an agenda that has to be shared by all of America. It's not just an interior agenda, and not just a President Obama agenda. It involves the schools, it involves local parks, it involves cities, and it has to take into account the recognition of the new realities that we face today. Urban parks are going to be a big part of our future because for most people, when they get connected up to a park, it usually is a park close to where they live, something in the city, because we now have an urban population versus the kind of population that we had 100 years ago here in this country. Secondly, we need to make sure that places that are so spectacular, like Yellowstone, are not just the playgrounds for those who are the richer and who can afford to travel those long distances to get there. So we need to find ways of providing opportunity for young people of all backgrounds, of all genders, of both genders, to come and to be able to have an experience at a place like Yellowstone, to experience the wonders of Yellowstone. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, but at the root of all of it is the creating of a consciousness that as people we are stronger when we are connected to the outdoors, when we're connected to the landscapes, when we know the conservation program of the country.
As the national park system has evolved, the kind of conception of what a park is has changed. Not just geysers and mountains, but also historical military battlefields. Is there a next logical step in the expansion of the park system that you guys are working on?
I think there are. The future of the national parks, I think, is dependent on the following. First, looking at the spectacular landscapes of the country and knowing that we have to connect those landscapes together. What was set aside, which became some of our 400 national parks, were set aside not necessarily thinking about how the whole biological ecosystem functioned, and so the boundaries are relatively artificial. We need to make sure that we are doing a much better job of connecting up the landscapes of America to our national parks. And it means going beyond our national parks and developing the kinds of partnerships with our fish and wildlife refuges, which we have 550 of them in this country, in this department, working with state and local governments and private landholders as we bring the landscapes of America together. Secondly, we need to look at places where we have not done as good a job as we should have done. We have some great urban parks, Gateway in New York and the Arch at St. Louis, but there's a lot more that we can do in the proximity of our great cities. So great urban parks, I think, will be one of the signature issues of our future. And third, the history of our country is a history which frankly has not been told very well. And our national parks, as one of its functions through historic preservation, tells the story of the birth home of Martin Luther King, of the National Mall, of the Lincoln Memorial, of all of the great sites of the battles of the Civil War, and all the other sites around the country. However, as that story has been told, the story of America is not complete, because much of that story has been buried and pushed under the rug, frankly, because people didn't want to tell that story, whether it's a story of African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, or women. And so we are committed in this administration to do a much better job at telling the complete story of all of America everywhere, and we will do that within our park system.
Yeah, that's great. The kinds of investments we're making in the park now, one of the rangers was telling me sort of it's like using more money to make the parks less developed instead of more developed. How do you see kind of green and climate challenges folding in with investing in the national parks?
The green and climate change challenges and investments that we make in our national parks create a great opportunity. First, there are challenges for us because we are the ones with 20% of the landmass in the United States under the Department of Interior, much of it within our national parks. We are the first ones to see what's happening with climate change and the effect that it's having. The story that is most poignant to me is that one of our greatest national parks, Glacier National Park, will not have any glaciers on it in 20 years, and that's because of climate change. And so how we take that reality and we move forward with the 21st century realities in our national park system, there are a number of things that we can do. First, we can use our national parks and the 300 million visitors that we get every year to educate them about what's happening with the landscapes and what's happening with climate change around the world. Secondly, we can be great examples of what it is that we can do to mitigate the consequences of climate change, including putting up renewable energy projects so that we are using solar energy and wind energy to help power some of our facilities in our national parks. And third, through the scientists that we have in the national park system, we can also deal with the understanding of this huge issue, which is upon humanity and upon the planet. And frankly, we have a long ways to go to fully understand how we respond to this reality that is warming our planet.
Could you just tell me any anecdotes of things that happened when you were, how this idea of the president visiting Yellowstone and Grand Canyon started this summer, or things that happened when you were on the ground in Yellowstone?
President Obama and I, long ago, I think, even before I became Secretary of Interior, had a conversation about him visiting our national parks at some point in time. And we had some conversations early on this year where I said there are some things that I would like you to do while I'm Secretary of Interior and you're President. I would like you to come to one of our national parks. And then through scheduling, someone said the President would really like to come to the national parks during the month of August. And then we sent suggestions, and I knew that he would go to Yellowstone because of his boyhood travels, and I thought and knew that there was a possibility of the Grand Canyon, and he did both. And so it was just very exciting. Now for me, again, just being on the ground with the President and his whole family at Yellowstone was a very special moment. I imagine that when I'm 90 years old and I'm sitting around thinking about some of the great things that I was able to do in life, that I will always treasure the moment where the President and the First Lady and the children and his whole family and I were watching Old Faithful erupt at Yellowstone, and knowing that that eruption that Barack Obama was watching in 2009 was the same eruption that he had seen as an 11-year-old boy.
And then finally, I just wanted to talk, and it's just a little bite, we did it last time too, but talk about what it feels like when you go over to the White House and you remember that the White House is a national park too, and it's part of this system, and even the president's house, he's living in a national park.
It is always inspiring to me to go to the White House because it really is, in some ways, the most symbolic manifestation of the great democracy and the greatness of America. And for me, it is more exciting to go there now than it ever has been, and I've been there many times. But to go there with President Barack Obama as president is simply absolutely gratifying, because it really is a statement of the American dream and how the American dream came true for this good friend of mine and someone who was not born with any kind of destiny to be president of the United States, but through the American ideas of hard work and dedication and overcoming struggle, here he is today as president of the United States. So for me personally, the White House has new meaning, and our country has new meaning because of his election. With respect to our people who work at the White House and take care of the grounds, I look at them with pride. You see in our men and women in the national park system great pride in what they do. As I see the uniforms that they wear and the logo of the national parks surrounding the White House, taking care of the president and the vice president and their families, it's part of a great tradition of our national parks. And it's fitting to celebrate that tradition as we are now moving up to the centennial celebration of our national parks. The year 2016 will celebrate the 100th year of the Organic Act that started the creation of the national park as a system. And we are just in some very, very exciting times. So even though it is, yes, a time of great challenge in the United States of America, it also is a time of great opportunity.
That's great. If I could just get you to say, the White House is a national park, or, to put on the front of that, then I think we're actually all done.
Okay. The White House is a national park, and the grounds around the White House are all national parks. National Mall are all part of that. And everywhere that I go and I see the national parks employees, the men and women who really make up the heart of this national park system, it makes me proud that in their hands they have been given the responsibility to take care of the most important symbols and the most important assets of America today.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. That was perfect.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for spending so much time on this. And
oh, no. It's my pleasure.
Cut and paste. And